The Heat were outplayed in game four. What was it that sparked the Celtics' third quarter run? And can Miami figure it out to counter in game five? Plus, we talk about Jimmy Butler's reaction after the loss and his unique leadership style and much more in today's playoff edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with Dave Ramil. However you might be tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA. When you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, they're going to throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. The Celtics said don't let them win one, and the Heat did. They lose to the Celtics 116-99, squandering a chance to close out this series at home in Miami. Now this series is 3-1 heading back to Boston. The Celtics made 42% of their three-pointers. They outscored the Heat by 33 points from three-point range. I know there's been a lot of talk about make or miss, and the Heat have been making a lot more than they've been missing lately. That was not the case for the Heat on Tuesday night. It was the case for the Celtics on Tuesday night. Do you think it's that simple in terms of what happened in Game 4, David?
Yeah, that's a simplistic explanation for it, but at the same time, it's an accurate one, and it also just kind of speaks to a larger issue in terms of how Boston defended Miami in order to generate those open looks, because they did do a really, really good job of defending Miami in their half-court sets. Whether it was denying Bam the ball in the low post or closing out on perimeter shooters, they would force turnovers, igniting their fast break opportunities, or at least just quickening the pace so that Miami's defense wasn't set. Let's say you have Gabe Vincent or Jimmy Butler driving to the hoop on one end. They miss a layup because they were doing such a good job of defending those in the paint, packing the paint, as we talked about in yesterday's show. And then let's say those same scorers would wind up falling to the ground. Next thing you know, it's a 5-on-4 sort of semi-fast break, and Miami's defenders were scrambling all over the place. And Jason Tatum starts getting confident. Marcus Smart, Grant Williams, they start hitting shots. Jaylen Brown doing something. You know, it was basically, it's tied together. There's a synergy there between Miami's defense and offense, and I think we saw that yesterday from Boston, controlling the pace, playing tough defense, and getting to open looks on their end of the floor. So I think it's a concern in terms of making or missing, but at the same time, there are deeper issues there that Miami does have to find a way to correct in Game 5.
Yeah, I thought the offense was especially bad for Miami in this game. They were holding the ball a lot. The spacing wasn't right where you wanted it to be. I thought there's been a little bit of spacing concerns throughout the series, but the Heat have done a good job of countering that. They've and obviously making the threes even when the spacing is a concern is better. And this wasn't the best Jimmy Butler game either, and I want to touch on that in a little bit. But this was a game where it felt like the Celtics controlled the tempo, especially defensively. The Heat would just they would get kind of caught picking up their dribble, trying to get rid of the ball. They ended up with 16 turnovers in this game. The first half was a lot better for Miami, but in the second half, it just felt like Boston ratcheted it up a little bit. Yeah. And the Heat, look, I know that it's human nature, right? For the team that's on the ropes, down 0-3 on the brink of elimination, that played poorly for 3 games and rolled over in that third game. I wondered what kind of Celtics team we would see, because I think it was just so surprising how much and how early they rolled over in that game 3. But, you know, they came out with some pride. And maybe it was a little bit of false bravado early in the game, earlier in that morning when they're saying, don't let us get one, don't let us get one. But look, they did what they had to do. They finally looked like the Boston Celtics. And I would have been surprised if they didn't look like the Boston Celtics at some point in the series, because that team that we saw the first 3 games, I don't know what that was, but that was not a team that deserved to be in the Eastern Conference Finals. This is the team that looks like it looked for most of the season. And these Celtics do deserve to be in the Eastern Conference Finals because they're that good. So credit to them, but also I think there's some obvious things that the Heat can do in terms of fixing things going into Game 5. And to me, it starts on the offensive end. I don't know about you if it's more of an offensive issue or a defensive issue for the Heat.
I'd say it's probably more on the defensive end
Mm.
that you have to correct. Again, because I think if you defend them well, you can weather the storm as they did in the New York Knicks series, where you're not necessarily shooting well. Yes, the first 3 games of this series have been somewhat atypical in terms of Miami's hot shooting, but even if you can somehow not knock down those shots and you can defend them better, concentrate on that end. But it was too tied together how Miami's defense or Miami's offense would wind up being stifled and then leading to fast break opportunities for the Celtics. And then again, getting, defenders scrambling, not necessarily covering guys when they were on the perimeter. They were making the extra pass. They were playing better. We can look at today's loss, yesterday's loss, because it's all tied together at this point, but we can look at the loss and say, Miami did make mistakes, and there's no doubt about it. But you have to give credit where credit is due to the Celtics for finding ways of capitalizing those opportunities and forcing Miami's problems. I see already a comment about Bam Adebayo's aggression. And you could say he only took 7 shots. That's a very simple way of saying it. But at the same time, you have to look at how they defended him. They did a really, really good job of denying the ball on having multiple defenders out in the perimeter to force tough entry passes. Al Horford did a better job, much more physical. I think he was allowed to be a lot more physical too. There were some plays there, possessions in particular, where he probably would have gotten a call against him in the first 3 games of the series. That was not the case in Game 4. So I think it was a tough break all around. Lots of things just kind of piling together for Miami. And yes, to your point, Boston was desperate. I mean, they had to play with this kind of intensity. It was a stark contrast to what we've seen over the first 3 games. And I too was surprised at how much how well they responded with the kind of intensity. I knew that they were going to have some kind of answer, but considering how deflated they looked in the Game 3 blowout, all the reporting since then about the problems in the locker room, Joe Mazzulla talking about, being out-coached and everything like that, and then for them to really pull it together, they did a hell of a job in Game 4.
I said this on last night's postcast, the short version of this that we did last night, but we do take, I think we forget how prideful these athletes can be at times, and nobody wants to get swept in the conference finals, especially after this. And so they went out, they got one. Teams are 149-0 when they're leading 3-0 in a series. We're going to talk about our level of concern here in a second. If there were a team to come back, if there ever was going to be a team to come back and be the first one to do it, on paper, it would look like this. A number 2 seed, deeply talented, that shoots a ton of threes, that can kind of just shoot their way into wins, versus an 8th seed that's maybe a little battered and bruised here, that doesn't have home court advantage, right? For Boston, you win Game 4 on the road. You've got Game 5 and Game 7 at home. So we're going to touch on that here in a second, David. But first, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs, so many different styles, but they're all comfy, easy to wear. You can wear them on so many different occasions. South Florida, if there's one thing that we're known for here, is all the outdoor activities you can engage in. And with Bird Dogs, whether you're sitting by the pool, playing around at golf, going out with friends or family, they've got you covered. Their shorts and pants are great. I know, Wes, that you're a huge fan. You wear them on multiple occasions, and they're the best option, especially here in South Florida, because you can wear them for so many occasions. They look great, they feel great, and they're great on your pocketbook as well. So just make sure to check out Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnNBA, and when you enter the promo code LockedOnNBA, they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. So make sure to go to birddogs.com and use the promo code LockedOnNBA.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Every dayers, we're going to be back tomorrow with our friend Howard Beck for his perspective on Heat Celtics and what could happen in Game 5. I want to have a conversation about Jimmy Butler. Interesting quotes from him after the game, talking about how they need to go out and just relax, right? Have a glass of wine, throw back a couple of beers, listen to some music, and basically predicting that the Heat are going to win Game 5 on the road and close out this series. Now, Jimmy's been full of predictions. He said that the Heat are going to win the championship, and look, that's awesome, right? I love that stuff, but I do think that it's an interesting. I want to get your perspective on this, because I'm sitting there in the press conference last night, David, and I'm listening to Jimmy Butler talk about this. You asked him a question. Friend of the program, Rohan Nakarni from Sports Illustrated, asked him the questions, and he just kept saying, "Hey, we're fine. We're fine. In the locker room after the game, music blaring, like all this stuff. And I think I came to the realization that this isn't just like Jimmy Butler trolling. He's not just trying to get laughs here. This is his leadership style. This is the way that Jimmy Butler goes. It is so much more important to do that after a loss than it is after a win. It's easy to go play music, have a Michelob Ultra, and be positive in front of the media after a win, right? But to do it after a loss and to be so public facing about it, I think it just speaks to that. You hear this all the time. You never want to get too high. You never want to get too low. You kind of just want to be right in the middle. You want to be steady wins, losses, and everything in between. And that to me is what that is for Jimmy Butler. And so people will, I think, focus on some of the more trolly comments, like we're going to go get one on the road and all this kind of stuff. But to me, it's more broad scope. It's okay. This is how he's been a positive influence on that locker room.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it starts from Spo too. Like if you hear one thing that players say about him, especially in these high pressure situations, is that Spo never shows that kind of pressure. Like he's never phased in the moment. You could be down 15 late in the fourth quarter, and he's the same manic intensity that he does at the start of the first, or even when they have a 20-point lead. He's ultra focused. He's always, competitive. He always makes sure the team is prepared, etc. And I think Jimmy Butler is cut from the same cloth. There's no questioning Jimmy's intensity and his devotion to winning. This is all he cares about. And at the same time, after a tough loss, there's this kind of idea from fans of sport in general that they want their players to be morose, to be, just apoplectic, unsure of what to do next, because fans take the losses so personally. And so for Jimmy Butler, it's not to say that he doesn't take it personally, but he also understands the importance of just being able to move on, get the team together, get everybody refocused. This was a tough loss. History is still in Miami's favor. They're not likely to lose 4 games in a row. And so why bother beating yourself up over it? They'll know what to do. They'll go in there prepared on game 5. They'll try their best to figure it out. I asked them, as you mentioned, about the concern whether or not momentum would shift in Boston's favor, because I know a lot of Celtics fans are hoping, well, that's it. After that first crack in the wall, next thing you know, there's a little bit of a leak, and next thing you know, it's a flood of a 4-game sweep after that. And Jimmy wasn't concerned at all. He's like, no, in fact, if anything, I think it's going to build momentum for us, because now we feel like our backs are against the wall. And that was something that was lacking in game 4. They did not come out with the same kind of sense of urgency and intensity that we had seen in the first 3 games of the series when they raced out to that 3-0 lead. And I think Boston did, to their credit, again, capitalize on a lot of that loss of energy. They weren't playing with the same intensity, the same kind of fury that we had seen in the first 3 games. And Jimmy, I think he was a little passive as well in the first half, not till later on.
It wasn't Jimmy's best game. It was passive in the first half. He came in midway through the third quarter, and in that final 6 minutes of the third quarter, scored 15 points to kind of muscle Miami back into the game. But it wasn't enough. It was a little too late. But then, even in the fourth quarter, like they were down by whatever it was, 9 points in the fourth quarter. And we've seen this Heat team flip double-digit leads into wins, right, in this postseason. And that just never really happened. Jimmy Butler had his shot blocked by Grant Williams, missed a couple of layups at the basket, like shots that he was normally making. He did not give that superhuman effort. I know he looked a little banged up in this one. I don't know how much that ankle injury is lingering from that Knicks series. But if I am going to raise any alarm flags, then it would probably be, is Jimmy Butler starting to wear down a little bit, because he looked worn down in that game.
He did look tired. I think he's gotten to the point now, much like the overall view of the regular season, he's got to pick and choose his spots. He can't just bring that kind of manic intensity at this point for 48 minutes. And I know everybody wants to make Michael Jordan comparisons, but that was a very different style of basketball, a very different animal. There's only so much you can do with the mid-range game, attacking constantly, when you can get demoralized almost as quickly with multiple 3-point shots on the other end. And I think that was the deflating thing is look, they were up 9, in the third quarter, early in the third quarter, I should say. Then Jason Tatum hits a couple of threes. Then Grant Williams comes off the bench. He hits a 3. Marcus Smart hits a 3. Horford hits a 3. And on the other end, they were doing a very good job of defending Miami. And so I think that is a demoralizing factor. everybody wants to look at the total box score there for Jimmy and say, oh, well, he had 29 points, whatever. Again, those points were a little bit too little too late when he was aggressive, but I think it was almost
I'm sorry.
No, I think it was in a way it was almost worse. Like it's great to want to see that aggressive version of Jimmy, but the offense, and Spo mentioned this in the post-game presser, it stagnates. It's too much ISO ball. Nobody else is hitting shots. And I know that Jimmy has to kind of take over games, and it's worked on some occasions, but only when the deficits are slightly smaller. And I think when Boston's not playing as well. And I think that was part of it, is that Boston was feeling it. So it was 5-on-1 yesterday, late in that third quarter, and it wasn't nearly enough.
I mean, Miami kept kind of making these tough 2-pointers, and Boston kept answering with 3-pointers, right?
Yeah.
And that's not.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's an established fact that I am not a mathematician on this show, but I'm pretty sure that that's not the formula that you need to win.
It's higher than 2, yeah. That's all you need to know.
And look, one of the things I noticed in last night's game was when Jimmy Butler was in the game, and it kind of like, yeah, the 29 points, that's nice. You can look at the box score, but like, going into Tuesday night's game, David, Jason Tatum was actually scoring better than Jimmy Butler on average. Like his shooting percentages were higher. He was scoring the same amount of points. But it just never felt like important points for Jason Tatum in the first 3 games, where Jimmy Butler, all those points felt like last night. I hate to say it, but those points kind of felt empty for Jimmy Butler, the way that they felt for Jason Tatum in the first 3 games. And I actually liked Miami's offense more when Jimmy Butler wasn't in the game. And look, the offensive numbers don't bear it out, but I thought just the process of the shots, the ball movement, and all these things were better. And look, that's not new, right? The Heat have basically had 2 different offenses this entire postseason. You have the Jimmy Butler isolation offense, and then you've got the Kyle Lowry, Duncan Robinson, Bam Adebayo, everybody eats offense. And toggling between the two has worked. And I'm not saying it's not working, okay? They lost 1 game. They have not swept any series this entire playoffs. They've won every series so far in this playoffs. But when one of those 2 offenses isn't really working, and the one is the Jimmy Butler offense, that puts Spo in kind of a tough position, right? And I think that's why we saw maybe Jimmy Butler rest as much as he did in that fourth quarter. What did you make of, like, because they go on that run, it was like a 6-0 little spurt of a run, right? And then Joe Mazzulla calls a timeout. And by the way, biggest adjustment in the series, Joe Mazzulla calling timeouts during early on Heat runs. And Tatum comes back in. They score 4 straight. Jimmy Butler does not come in when Tatum comes in. Yeah. And then Spo is forced to call a timeout like 2 minutes later. And then Jimmy Butler comes in. I think it's too simplistic to say, well, that was the game right there. I think that the Celtics were just shooting much better than the Heat were, and that run was probably not going to be sustained regardless. But what did you think of Spo's decision? Because I found it curious. I did. That Spo did not check Jimmy Butler back into the game at 9 minutes, as opposed to when he brought him back into the game at like 7 or 8 minutes, whatever it was.
Yeah, I think Rowan mentioned something about it too via Twitter. It seemed like Spo got a little too cute. I think they were going to get a TV timeout shortly there afterwards, and I guess he thought he could write it out. And in that 1.5 minutes of game play where Jimmy wasn't in the game, Celtics were able to increase their lead there, and by that point, when Jimmy did come back in, it was impossible for any kind of mounting of comebacks there. So it was probably not the best decision. And I know you don't want to go to that well. Maybe there was something to it. I don't. We've seen Jimmy fight.
I wonder if it
was
before. Spo thinking the same thing I thought was, hey, I kind of like the ball movement in the offense more when he's out.
Yeah, it's possible. This is. I like the point about Tatum being the series leading scorer. Aside, even before Game 4, he was the leading scorer in the series. But the shot percentages weren't there, obviously, and the offense has been too predictable. A lot of iso ball between the two Jays. Not a lot.
Well, the biggest problem wasn't even the percentage; it was the turnovers. It was just it was Jason Tatum just turning the ball over. His turnover to assist ratio being upside down. But the Celtics won the turnover battle in Game 4. They won the rebounding battle. They won like all the important things. The offensive rebounds, 50-50 balls, like down the stretch. They just played with more energy. And to a man, everybody that we talked to post-game in the locker room, at the podium, Eric Spoelstra said, yep, pretty much. They played with more energy. They came out with that fight. They did that. I don't know that it's enough to sound the alarm bells. I kind of teased it earlier, but David, just like your general level of concern right now for the Miami Heat.
Mid concern, I'd say.
Mid concern. Okay.
Yeah, not panic, certainly.
Right.
But you don't want Boston to feel like they've been given a chance. And I know people are saying, well, they play worse than Boston. And, well, that wasn't enough to stop them in Game 7 versus the Sixers either. And I know the Sixers kind of rolled over and died themselves, but a lot of that was due to Jason Tatum going off for 50 points, which is a statistical possibility. You expect Miami's defenders to be able to challenge him more than whatever Philadelphia defended him with in Game 7, and yet he is that good, and he was that good yesterday in Game 4. He can get that step back side step three. He'll create space, and he sees that first one fall, and he starts to feel it himself. Look. He's not going to get that shoulder called against him. He creates space that way by leaning that shoulder. There was a couple plays there where he was pushing off Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, anybody who was on him to create that spacing, and they're going to let him go with that, and they're not going to call it against him. And if that's enough for him to be able to create that little space and he starts to feel that kind of rhythm early on, that could spell doom for Miami. If you go there, let's say you lose Game 5. If the Heat go in there and lose Game 5, does Boston come back in Game 6 and feel like, all right, now it's a 3-2 series. It's completely different. We have a chance, and we were comfortable. And you look at what Boston's done all season. They are a very good team. Miami being up 3-0 is the anomaly here, not the other way around. And so I think you have to have some concern. I also like the temperament of the team, the fact that they took the loss personally, but weren't going to just hang their heads over it. We're focused. We're a little bit more intense. Like Jimmy, I mentioned this in yesterday's show. Unfortunately, the audio did not get recorded, but Jimmy seemed downright joyful, singing up at the podium, very, very comfortable, talking about having a couple beers, relaxing with the teammates, and then just kind of focusing in on what's necessary to win in Game 5. And that being the case, Heat fans should take some nice confidence in that as well.
I'll tell you why I'm really confident in the Miami Heat for Game 5. I'm going to do that after this. This is Locked On Heat. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Everydayers, we're going to be back tomorrow with our friend Howard Beck on his perspective on Heat Celtics. You can reach Locked On Heat on Twitter, Instagram, email us at lockedonheat@gmail.com. Thank you to everybody commenting here, watching YouTube live. If you're watching us right now, feel free to leave your questions in the comment section. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Here's the number one reason why I'm optimistic about the Heat's chances to close this out in Game 5, not just the series. Boston, Thursday night. This is the first time this series where Eric Spoelstra has been put in position to have to make the adjustments.
Yeah.
Right? And if I'm Joe Mazzulla, I'm a little worried about that because, like I said this earlier, like the biggest adjustment that Mazzulla made was I'm going to call timeouts while the Heat are making their runs. And B, my players are going to shoot better from three-point range. And so I think for the Heat, who have shot relatively well throughout the playoffs and throughout specifically this series very well, now you're asking Eric Spoelstra to make some adjustments. Now he's the one that gets to go into his film room and crunch the numbers and watch some of this stuff and figure out where some new weaknesses are and where some adjustments could be made. And I am not smart enough to know what specific kind of floppy actions and backdoor cuts and whatever the kind of slot cuts and ghost this that Eric Spoelstra is going to draw up, right? Nobody is, and that's why Spoelstra is the best in the league at what it is that he does. But I do have one adjustment that I kind of want to float your way.
All right.
Might it be time to bench Kevin Love? He doesn't have to not play, but he only played 12 minutes in this one. He's had the short leash a lot of this series. He comes out after like 4 or 5 minutes in some of these games. And I thought early in this game, when it looked like Boston was playing with tempo, Kevin Love really couldn't hang, right? And he even waved to kind of come out early in this one too, and good self-awareness by him. But like this team plays better in this series when Caleb Martin is in the game at that 4 spot, especially after Boston went small with their 3-guard lineup and ditched that double big lineup. And even in this last game, we didn't even see much of the double big lineup at all. In Game 3, Mazzulla went to that 3-guard lineup, but he would still like kind of get halfway through the first quarter back to the double big lineup. And he didn't do that in Game 4. He really doubled down on the 3 guards, playing one of Al Horford, Robert Williams at a time. And I just don't know if he's going to do that if this is the series for Kevin Love. I think Kevin Love could start for you in the NBA Finals if the Heat do end up getting to that point. This is not a long-term thing for me with Kevin Love. I just think if you need to go get one game in Boston and what you need is tone setting early in that game, I like Caleb Martin for that assignment.
I agree 100%. I think he's a better option right now. And I think Love has the temperament and the self-awareness, as you said, to know that his role is probably not best as a starter in this series. I think he can still make an impact. As you said, he can play later on. You can bring him off the bench.
Back up
space the floor. Yeah, back up big.
You might be a better backup center option than Cody Zeller. It's been a rough series for Cody Zeller.
Yeah, I think you do less. A lot of pick and roll with Zeller, and he was getting some looks at the rim yesterday. The minutes weren't as bad as they have been at other points in the series, but I think they'd be even better. Imagine pick and roll with second units with either Gabe, Kyle Lowry, etc. And then all of a sudden, Love sets a screen, but instead of diving towards the rim, he backpedals towards a wide open three, and then whatever ball handler picks up both defenders on their way to the hoop, kicks it out to a wide open Love who has to be able to knock
And if
down
Robert
shots.
Williams is now the backup center,
Right.
Al Horford starting, obviously, then you're drawing potentially Robert Williams away from the basket, which is even more important. Like Robert Williams is planted near the basket when it's Cody Zeller in there.
Yeah, exactly, because Zeller's not a perimeter threat. So
exactly.
I think Caleb should start. I think he's going to make a positive impact. I think that's a good way of matching Boston's pace, and he's been playing phenomenally. He can ignite the defense. He can be knocking down the shots as needed. He can be driving to the rim, getting Boston's perimeter defenders, the back cuts, etc., drawing fouls. We've seen him take his game to another level, and I think this would be a great opportunity for him to continue to build on that.
We didn't do blame pie in this one, but it is worth mentioning. Well, let's just get to this question from Daniel, who basically writes it in for us. Bam, only 7 shots. Lowry, 2 of 8, 4 turnovers. Both were disappointing. We need aggressive Bam for the rest of the series. Tough game for Kyle Lowry. I like the tempo that he plays with. I always like the tempo that he plays with, but he can't go 1 of 5 from 3-point range. You said this earlier, but him going 1 of 5, Gabe going 1 of 4, Max going 1 of 5, Jimmy going 1 of 4 from 3-point range, Duncan going 0 for 4. That was the reason. I don't really care about Jimmy going 1 for 4. It was a little strange that I took 4 3-pointers, but if Lowry and your other shooters are not going to make shots, then that's going to make it really tough against a really good Celtics offense. In terms of Bam,
I want you to speak on Bam because I'm getting apparently accused of defending him.
No, I don't care about. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about the comments. Who cares? It's look. I think they needed more from Bam, and it was sort of the opposite of the Jimmy Butler press conference post game, where he did seem almost joyful and looking forward to the chance to come back after a loss. Where Bam was, when Bam
he does take it more personally.
And it's not even the loss that necessarily. I think that he obviously does not enjoy losing. That's not breaking news. But when he knows that he has not played up to his own standards, he does get into his feelings a little bit in post game, and he does take it very personally. And you can kind of tell. You can kind of tell with him. He's usually pretty dry post game anyway. He's not Jimmy Butler post game. He's not cracking jokes. He does not have that kind of personality. He's still pretty even keeled. But I think just being around the team as much as we have, you can kind of tell when he's a little bit bothered. And I sensed that. It's subtle, but I sensed it with him last night. And we do tend to see Bam, when he gets into that kind of mood, bounce back with a big game. And it's been a while since we've gotten a big Bam Adebayo game. And I know that the Celtics have the bodies. I know that they cluttered the paint. And I'm not excusing Bam Adebayo, but I do think that there's a reason why he did not score more than 10 points and only took 7 shots in that game. And he's had to do so much defensively. He's been maybe the best defender in these playoffs, outside of maybe the highest of highs of Anthony Davis in the Western Conference. And he's been phenomenal in these playoffs. Okay. I want to make sure I say that, but I am predicting a bigger Bam game in game 5, because when he gets like that, he tends to come out aggressive. And I have all the respect in the world for Al Horford. Robert Williams is a good defender. He is not as good as he was last year. I think Bam Adebayo can and should beat those guys. They are not so good that they could stop Bam and limit Bam to the degree that they limited him in game 4. So I think that we're going to get a big Bam game in game 5, or at least a try for it.
He was a monster in game 2, and in game 3 it wasn't necessary because their shooting was so hot and they were up 30. So he didn't necessarily need to. And even in his minutes, obviously, the spin move against Jaylen Brown is a highlight from all that. But he was pretty solid overall, as you mentioned, the playmaking, the defense, everything that he brings to the table, the rebounding. Yeah, I don't know how he'll bounce back. I think again, I think Boston did a pretty good job of defending him, and maybe there was some aggression there. I think a lack of aggression. I think there was also foul trouble going against him, which kind of stifled that aggression to a certain degree.
Yeah,
And there
4
were a
fouls
number of
this game.
calls here, and there were a number of calls also that I thought could have gone against Boston, non-calls that they just let him play through. And I don't think he necessarily gets hung up on that, but there's only so much he can do to continue to fight through that. So we'll see. We'll see how he responds. I mean, he might. I don't think he was. I don't think he was bad in game 4. I just don't think he was good either. And that was a night where they needed him to be good, if not great. And so we'll see if he can match that level of intensity that he brought in game 2 for game 5 on the road. It's a little bit tougher. Again, I mean, Boston certainly with their backs in the wall. Whose backs are harder against the wall? I guess you should ask between
I mean,
Miami and Boston. Yeah,
the Celtics still have to win 3 more. The Heat have to only win 1 more. My biggest thing too, and this goes to this will be our last one. Jeff's question: what's the biggest letdown of Game 4? It's the fact that we have to do a Game 5. I was kind of looking forward to a little bit of a break here, having the chance for Miami to take almost like a long break to prepare for a very tough Denver Nuggets team. Now you don't get to really do that. But if the difference is 2 days, and it's not going to be that big of a deal, but I think there is a high level of urgency for the Heat to take care of business in Game 5 in Boston. Like if you let the Celtics look, they kept saying, "Don't let us get one," and I do think there was some false bravado in that. But sometimes that's all you need is get one, win one in Boston, and then all of a sudden this is looking a lot different. And Miami's biggest edge in this series is not the talent. It's the coaching and it's the mental edge. It's the fact that they are the gritty team, that they are mentally tough, and the Celtics are soft, right? But if the Celtics start picking up steam, we've seen what they could do. The first 3 weeks of the regular season, David, the best offense historically in NBA history, right? Like they can get on a roll and they could be a really tough team. You do not want this to get to 6 games or 7 games or anything like that, because now all of a sudden you're giving Boston a little bit of confidence. And if you're the Heat, that's the last thing that you want to give this team. So we'll see what happens. Game 5, Thursday night in Boston. David and I will be back immediately following the buzzer with a recap of the game. Everydayers will be back also tomorrow morning with Howard back, his thoughts on Heat Celtics. Looking forward to that. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app. David, thanks for joining me.
Yet again, absolutely.